The room was dark and cold, lit only by dim blue lights that hung from the ceiling like dying stars. Metal walls surrounded the chamber, and the sound of machines echoed softly in the background. Chains rattled every time the girl moved, though. She had little strength left to move at all. Her wrists were bruised, her face pale, and her body marked with wounds that told the story of endless pain. The aliens stood around her, their eyes glowing with cruel interest, their long fingers tapping against the metal table as if they were waiting for her to break. She had been screaming for hours, maybe days. She could no longer tell. The pain was sharp, deep, and without mercy. They wanted to see how long a human could survive under torture. They wanted to know if the stories of human toughness were true. Or only myths. The leader of the aliens, tall and thin, leaned closer to her. His voice was smooth and cold as ice when he whispered that she would die here, forgotten in the silence of space. She closed her eyes, her breath ragged, but she did not answer. She had no strength left for words. Needles pierced her skin again, electric currents ran through her bones, and her body shook violently. But she bit her lips so hard that blood filled her mouth rather than give them the satisfaction of another scream. The aliens smiled among themselves. They thought they had finally broken her. They thought she was nothing more than fragile flesh, something weak to be played with until the last spark of life faded. Time passed like a nightmare that would not end. Her body failed piece by piece, and finally her chest rose one last time and then fell still. The machines that tracked her heartbeat let out a flat sound that filled the chamber. She was gone. The girl was dead. The aliens laughed in their own harsh language, some clapping their clawed hands together as a leader declared the test complete. They had proved that even humans had limits. They ordered her body to be left on the cold floor as a reminder to the others they kept locked in cages nearby. The other prisoners, silent and terrified, lowered their eyes, too afraid to look at what had been done to her. To them, she was another human who came, suffered, and died far from home. But the chamber did not stay silent for long. Minutes crawled by. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Her body lay still, but the air around her seemed heavier, colder. Some of the aliens who were cleaning the tools glanced back nervously, though they could not explain why. 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Eyes. The machines had already been switched off, but her chest moved faintly, too faint to notice at first. A twitch in her fingers, a shiver across her lips. 30 minutes. Now, the prisoners in the cages began to whisper, thinking their eyes were playing tricks on them. She should have been gone. She had no pulse, no breath, no life, and yet something was happening. At the 37th minute, her eyes snapped open. They were no longer the soft human eyes the aliens remembered, but sharp, cold, and burning with something they did not understand. She sat up slowly, every movement deliberate, like she was testing a new strength inside her body. The chains that once held her down rattled as she rose to her feet. The aliens froze where they stood, unable to believe what they were seeing. Their records were clear. The human girl had died. They had witnessed her last breath. But here she was, alive again. Standing in the middle of the chamber as if death had never touched her, the leader of the aliens stepped forward, his voice unsteady for the first time. He asked how this was possible, but she only looked at him with eyes that seemed far older than they had been before. No words passed her lips, but the silence was worse than anything she could have said. The other aliens stepped back in fear, some dropping the tools in their hands. She began to walk forward, slow and calm, as though she had all the time in the world. The prisoners pressed their faces to the bars of their cages, their hearts pounding. They had seen humans endure pain. They had seen humans resist fear. They had never seen this. Each step she took echoed in the chamber like a drumbeat, steady and unstoppable. The air grew heavy, as though the whole station was holding its breath. The aliens whispered among themselves, some saying it was not her at all, but something wearing her skin. Others believed this was the proof of the ancient warnings they had. Heard in whispers, humans were not to be pushed too far, for something always came back from the dark. She stopped in the middle of the room, and simply stared at the alien leader. But a moment no one moved. It was as if time itself was waiting to see what she would do next. The leader raised his weapon with a shaking hand, but before he could fire, she smiled. It was not the smile of a broken victim or a frightened prisoner. It was the smile of someone who had crossed the line between life and death and returned with knowledge no one else carried. That smile froze the blood of every alien who saw it. The prisoners in the cages began to hope, a dangerous, trembling hope that spread like fire among them. The girl who should have died was alive, and nothing in the galaxy would be the same again. The story of the girl spread through the alien station like a storm. Every corridor, every room, every shadow carried whispers of her return. Soldiers who once walked proudly now moved with nervous eyes, glancing over their shoulders as if she could appear at any moment. Technicians stopped working on their machines, their hands trembling when they remembered the lifeless body they had seen on the floor and how it had risen 37 minutes later. No one wanted to say it out loud, but all of them felt the same thing: fear. The girl did not speak. She did not rush or attack. She simply walked the halls with slow steps, her chains broken, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Wherever she went, silence followed. Doors shut quickly, conversations died, and guards stepped back rather than confront her. Some aliens tried to convince themselves that this was only a mistake, that the machines must have malfunctioned when they declared her dead. But deep in their minds they knew the truth. They had killed her, and she had come back. The commander of the station called his officers together. He demanded that they stop spreading fear and rumors, but even his voice shook as he spoke. One officer suggested they capture her again and finish the job. Another argued that they should eject her into space and let the void swallow her. But then an old scientist, his skin pale with dread, warned them not to try. He told them he had studied humans before, and what he saw now did not match anything in his data. He whispered that humans were not like other species. They were deathworlders, born on a planet where danger lived in every corner, where only the strongest survived. If she has returned once, he said, his voice breaking, then death itself may no longer hold her. The commander shouted at him to be silent, but the room was already filled with unease. Each officer could remember the look in her eyes when she returned. They had seen many prisoners, many broken victims, but none had ever looked at them with such calm certainty. It was not the look of prey, it was the look of a predator. Meanwhile, in the cages, the other human prisoners had begun to whisper to each other. Their despair, once heavy as iron, started to lift. They had watched her die and come back. Some thought it was a miracle. Some thought she was no longer truly human, but something greater. To them, she was a sign that they were not abandoned. Even in the darkest corner of the galaxy, humans could not be broken so easily. Hope, once crushed, now spread like fire in their hearts. The aliens noticed the change in their prisoners. The humans no longer bowed their heads and no longer wept quietly. Instead, they pressed against the bars of their cages, their eyes bright with something dangerous. It was not escape they planned, not yet, but they were no longer afraid of their captors. And fear, the aliens knew, was the only thing that kept humans under control. The girl walked past the cages once, her eyes meeting those of the prisoners. She did not speak, but the message was clear. She had returned, and she was not finished. The prisoners reached out their hands through the bars, trying to touch even the air around her as she passed. Some wept silently, not out of pain but out of relief. In the control rooms, reports began to arrive. Guards were refusing to patrol certain sections of the station. Tools were found abandoned in hallways. Some workers requested transfer off the station, while others simply disappeared without permission. The fear of one girl had started to break the entire order of the station. The commander ordered tighter control, but the soldiers no longer listened the way they once did. Orders lost their power when the one giving them could not hide the terror in his own voice. Late that cycle, 2 guards were found dead near the chamber where she had first been kept. Their bodies showed no wounds, no burns, no broken bones. They looked as if life had simply drained from them, leaving behind nothing but empty shells. No one knew what had happened, but everyone suspected the same answer. The girl had passed that way. The commander tried to cover it up, but the rumor spread faster than he could stop it. Now the whispers changed. Not only had she come back from death, but she could bring death without even touching. The scientist who had warned them earlier locked himself in his lab, searching through old records, digging into forbidden files. He muttered that the galaxy had always feared humans, that there were old warnings written by civilizations long gone. Do not push them too far, the warnings said. For when they break, they rise again stronger. The scientist trembled as he read, realizing that his people had ignored what others before them had already learned in blood. As the lights flickered across the station and silence grew heavier, the girl stood at the center of it all, silent and patient. She did not run, she did not hide, and she did not strike quickly. She let fear do the work for her. Every alien felt it now, deep in their bones. The girl who should have died was not only alive, she was waiting, and none of them knew what for. The station grew quieter with every passing cycle, but the silence was not peace. It was heavy, pressing on the chest of every alien who walked the halls. Work slowed. Guards hesitated to move alone, and even the commander no longer slept. Everywhere, whispers about the human girl grew. She had died and come back, and now she was changing. Some aliens claimed her wounds had vanished overnight. Others said they saw her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The stories were different, but all carried the same weight of dread. Something was happening to her, something beyond their understanding. In the cages, the other humans noticed first. They saw the marks on her arms close day by day until her skin looked almost untouched. They saw how she no longer limped, no longer showed weakness, even though they had all seen her broken only days before. She seemed stronger than before her death, as if her body had learned from every cut, every burn, every broken bone. She did not need food as often, and her eyes never closed in sleep. The prisoners began to believe she was no longer just one of them. She was something greater, something born from pain. One of the alien scientists dared to study the security footage in secret. He slowed the recordings frame by frame until he found what he was looking for. He saw the girl lying dead, on the floor, still as stone. He watched her chest rise faintly before her eyes snapped open. But there was more. In the moments before she moved, her body seemed to pulse with a faint light, like energy running beneath her skin. He froze the screen and stared at it, his heart racing. Humans were not supposed to do that. Their bodies did not glow with energy. He copied the images and brought them to his superior, his hands shaking. "She is not just healing," he whispered. "She is adapting." The superior dismissed him, too afraid to accept what the images showed. But the scientist could not let it go. He began digging through old records, forgotten warnings written by other civilizations long before his own people had ruled this part of space. He found fragments of reports, humans surviving plagues that killed entire worlds, humans enduring climates no other species could step foot in, humans fighting wars that should have ended them, but instead made them stronger. Each time they suffered, they changed. Each time they broke, they came back harder. The scientist's hands trembled as he read the final words of one ancient report. "Do not kill them slowly. Do not test their limits. Death is not the end. For them, it is the beginning." Back in the prison block, the girl stood watching the guards. She did not speak, but her silence was louder than screams. The guards began to fear walking past her cage. Some refused duty, others begged to be moved to another part of the station. One guard, desperate to prove his bravery, spat at her feet and told her she should have stayed dead. She tilted her head slightly, and without moving closer, she whispered, her first words since her return, "You should not have done that." The guard laughed nervously, but when he went to his quarters later, he was found lifeless, his body pale, his eyes wide open as though he had seen something too terrible to bear. The aliens no longer doubted her power. The commander tried to hold control. He shouted that the humans were weak, that the girl was just a freak accident. But even his officers no longer believed him. They saw the fear in his own eyes. They saw how he avoided the girl's gaze when he passed her in the hall. they knew his words were empty.
Ow!
One by one, they began to lose faith in their leader, and without faith, no order could last. The prisoners whispered among themselves in the dark, their voices trembling with both fear and hope. Some said she was no longer fully human. Some said she was the spirit of all their pain given flesh. But all agreed on one thing: she was their chance. They watched as she moved with more strength every day, her steps growing surer, her presence heavier. She had become a symbol not only to them, but to the aliens who feared her. The scientist who had discovered the truth tried one last time to warn his commander. He showed him the recordings, the old reports, the glowing pulse beneath her skin. "We have awakened something we cannot control," he said, his voice breaking. "She will not stop here. She will spread." The commander slammed his hand on the table, refusing to listen, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. He knew it was too late. They had tried to break a human, and instead they had built something far more dangerous. In the shadows of the station, the girl smiled for the second time. It was not a smile of kindness or warmth. It was cold, sharp, and filled with the knowledge that every alien around her now carried. They thought they had seen her die once. They would never understand what she had become now. Deep down, none of them wanted to find out. The alien station felt less like a fortress now, and more like a grave waiting to be filled. Lights flickered in the corridors, systems failed without warning, and guards who once walked with pride now clutched their weapons like frightened children. The fear of the girl was everywhere. She did not rush, she did not scream, and she did not fight openly. But her silence was worse. Every step she took echoed like thunder in the ears of those who watched her. The aliens began to believe that the station itself was turning against them, that her very presence was bending it to her will. It began with small things. A patrol of 3 guards walked into a corridor where the lights suddenly died. It's only seconds. Later, the lights came back and 2 of the guards were gone. The one who returned stumbled back to the commander with eyes wide and breath shallow, unable to say what had happened. He could only whisper, "She was there." The commander slapped him and called him a coward, but the guards trembling. Body told the truth. She was moving through the shadows, unseen, but always near. The prisoners felt the change as well. They no longer saw her as just a victim who had survived. Now, they saw her as the hunter and the aliens as prey. Each night, they whispered to one another about what they would do if they were freed, how they would follow her, how they would tear down everything their captors had built. Hope, once dangerous, now grew stronger than fear. The guards noticed, and it only added to their unease. The humans were supposed to be broken, but instead they looked at their captors with steady eyes that no longer begged for mercy. The scientist who had studied her tried once more to warn his people. He showed his data to the officers, showing how her wounds closed faster, how her strength grew daily, how she seemed to no longer require food or rest. He said she was no longer bound by the rules of flesh. "You tortured her to death," he whispered, "and now she is more than alive. You created this." But the officers only argued among themselves. Some wanted to destroy her immediately. Others feared that another death would only make her stronger. The commander shouted that they would do nothing, that fear was only in their minds. Yet when he walked the halls alone, he avoided the places where she had been seen. His orders grew weaker every day. One night, a group of soldiers gathered courage and stormed the chamber where she had once been kept. They shouted, fired weapons, and searched every corner. They found nothing, but when they turned to leave, the door sealed behind them, trapping them inside. The prisoners in the cages nearby pressed against the bars, listening to the screams from within. When the doors finally opened, the soldiers were gone. Only silence remained. The girl walked past the chamber not long after, her eyes calm, her steps slow. As if nothing had happened, the aliens began to turn on one another. Some accused the commander of weakness. Others accused the scientist of bringing bad luck with his warnings. Fights broke out in the mess halls, weapons drawn between officers who once trusted each other. The fear of the girl grew so heavy that it no longer mattered if she was near or not. Her presence lived inside their minds. Even in empty rooms, They thought they saw her in the shadows. Then, for the first time, she spoke to them openly. She walked into the central hall where a dozen guards froze in shock at her sudden appearance. None dared to shoot. She looked at them, her face pale but unafraid, and said in a voice colder than the vacuum of space, "You should have let me die." Those words struck harder than any weapon. The guards stepped back, some dropping their rifles, others trembling until their knees gave way. She turned and walked away without striking a single blow. But the damage was done. Her words carved themselves into their hearts like knives. That cycle, more systems began to fail. Doors refused to open. The lights dimmed for long stretches. Power drained from the engines. The station itself seemed to weaken under her presence. The scientists whispered that it was not the station breaking, it was them. Their fear was the infection, spreading faster than any machine could repair. The humans in the cages watched with quiet joy as their captors lost control. They knew something was coming, something that could no longer be stopped. The commander gathered his last loyal officers and ordered them to prepare an escape pod. He would abandon the station and leave the problem behind. But when he reached the docking bay, he found every pod already disabled. Someone had been there before him. And standing in the shadows near the control panel, he saw her. She did not move, did not speak, but her presence alone was enough to make the commander stumble back in terror. He realized then that he was no longer the hunter, no longer the one in command. He was just another animal trapped in a cage, waiting for her to decide his fate. For the first time in his life, the commander felt what humans had always felt under his rule: helplessness. And he understood, far too late, that they had created their own nightmare. The girl, who should have been nothing more than another broken prisoner, had become the end of them all. The station had turned into a maze of fear. Doors creaked open by themselves, lights flickered without reason, and the sound of footsteps echoed where no one walked. The aliens were no longer in control. They had the weapons, the technology, the numbers, but none of it mattered anymore. Every corner felt dangerous. Every shadow carried her presence. The girl had not struck openly yet, but one by one the torturers were disappearing. No alarms, no battles, no signs of struggle, just silence followed by absence. It began with the guard who had spit at her. He'd been found lifeless, eyes wide open. Then 2 soldiers vanished while on patrol, their weapons left on the floor, as if they had simply been plucked from existence. Next was the officer who had ordered her chained. His body was discovered in his quarters, his face twisted in terror, though there were no wounds. The aliens whispered among themselves, but no one dared say the truth aloud. She was hunting them. The scientist who had studied her locked himself away with his notes. Scribbling furiously, trying to understand what was happening, he wrote that her body was not just adapting, it was learning. Every torment they had inflicted had taught her something new. Every pain had carved strength into her flesh. They thought death was the end, he whispered to himself, but death was her beginning. He knew then that her survival was no accident. It was human nature itself. The prisoners in the cages could feel the change as well. At night, they heard the screams of aliens echo through the halls, short and sharp, then cut off into silence. Each time they pressed closer to the bars, waiting for her to return. When she walked past, they reached for her, whispering words of hope, but she only gave them a single glance. Her silence spoke louder than any promise. She was not freeing them yet, not until her hunt was complete. The commander, once proud, was now a broken man. He shouted orders that no one followed. His officers lied to him, hiding the truth of how many had vanished. Some of his soldiers deserted, trying to escape through maintenance tunnels, but none returned. Rumors spread that she had found them before they reached the pods. The commander sat alone in his chamber, staring at the walls, waiting for the sound. Of her steps, the killings grew stranger. One alien was found strapped to the same chair where she had once been tortured, his body lifeless, his face frozen in fear. Another was discovered with burns across his skin, the exact burns he had once inflicted on her. It was as if she remembered every hand that had harmed her, and she returned their cruelty piece by piece. The aliens began to understand this was not random. This was justice. carved with silence and patience. The scientist tried to warn the rest. He told them that she was not killing blindly, that she was following a pattern. She is erasing those who touched her first, he explained, and when she is finished with them, she will move to the rest. His words spread faster than he wanted. Panic broke out. Soldiers locked themselves in rooms, refusing to patrol. Officers accused each other, terrified that their names were next on her list. The station dissolved into chaos without a single shot fired, and through it all, the girl walked. She did not run, she did not hide. She simply appeared where she was least expected, her pale face and cold eyes freezing every heart that saw her. No one dared attack. No one dared even breathe too loudly in her presence. When she looked at them, they felt as though she already knew their crimes, their fears, their end. Finally, the commander gathered his last dozen soldiers in the central hall. He told them they would face her together, that they could not let one human destroy them all. His voice was hollow, his hands shaking, but he had nothing left but the illusion of control. The soldiers raised their weapons, standing in a circle, waiting. The silence stretched long, each second an eternity. And then, without sound, she was there. She stood at the edge of the hall, chains still hanging from her wrists, her steps slow and steady. The soldiers raised their rifles, but none fired. Her eyes swept across them, and their hands shook so violently that the weapons clattered to the floor. The commander screamed at them to shoot, but the fear inside them was too strong. She took another step, then another. The air grew heavy, the lights dimmed, and the hall itself seemed to shrink around her. "You tried to end me," she said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Now I end you." The soldiers broke. Some fled, some dropped. To their knees, others covered their faces as if hiding could save them. The commander alone remained standing, his face pale, his body trembling, as she walked toward him. And in that moment, every alien in the station understood the hunt was no longer beginning, it was almost over. The alien station was no longer alive with noise and order. It had become a tomb of silence. Corridors once filled with marching soldiers now lay empty, their walls scarred with claw marks where terrified hands had tried to escape. Lights flickered, weakly, as if the very systems of the station had given up. The girl walked through it all, her chains dragging softly against the floor, the sound carrying farther than it should have. Every alien who still lived knew that sound, and every one of them dreaded hearing it grow closer. The commander was the last to hold his ground. Soldiers had either fled into the dark or been erased one by one, their bodies left as silent warnings. He had tried everything, locking doors, shutting down power, even ordering her body to be burned when she first returned, but nothing had stopped her. Now he stood in the command chamber, the great screens showing the stars beyond, his hands shaking on the control desk. His once loyal officers had abandoned him. He was alone, waiting for the inevitable. She arrived without hurry. The door slid open with a groan, and she stepped inside. Her eyes locked onto him, calm, unblinking, merciless. The commander lifted his weapon, his finger trembling on the trigger. For a moment, the chamber was filled with the hum of his rifle charging. But when she smiled, that cold, sharp smile that had haunted them all, his hands gave way. The weapon fell with a dull clang onto the floor. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She did not answer. She only walked toward the central console, her chains rattling against the metal floor. The commander backed away until his shoulders hit the wall, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with terror. He had commanded fleets, destroyed planets, broken countless prisoners, but in the face of one human girl, he was nothing. When she reached the console, she placed her hands on it. The screens flickered, systems shifting as though the station itself obeyed her will. For the first time since her return, she spoke with a voice strong and clear, carrying across every communicator in the station and beyond. "This is what happens when you break us," she said. "Remember." Every prisoner in the cages heard her words, their eyes filled with fire and hope. Every alien who still lived heard them too, their blood cold with dread. And beyond the station, the signal. carried into the galaxy, racing across the stars. Civilizations far away would hear the message and shiver. They would remember the story of the girl who died. They would understand the warning that came with her voice. The commander tried to crawl away, but her shadow fell over him. She looked down at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He begged for mercy in a language filled with trembling words, but she only shook her head. "Mercy," she whispered, "is what you never gave." His scream echoed once in the chamber, then cut short. The station fell into silence again. When the humans in the cages heard the silence, they knew the hunt was over. Moments later doors slid open one by one. They stepped out, their bodies weak from hunger and chains, but their hearts burning with strength. The girl walked past them, not saying a word, but none needed her words. They followed her, knowing she was no longer just a victim. She was a sign. The station drifted in space, lifeless except for the freed prisoners. The girl stood at the viewport, staring at the stars, her reflection faint in the glass. She looked, neither alive nor dead, but something in between, something stronger. Behind her, the survivors whispered her name, though none of them truly knew it. To them, she was simply the girl who had walked back from death. And across the galaxy, the message spread. Governments listened, armies paused, old warnings resurfaced. The story was told in hushed voices. The aliens tortured a human girl too. Death. But 37 minutes later, she returned. One by one, the stars carried her legend. And with it came a truth none could ignore. Humans were not just hard to kill. They were impossible to break. The galaxy would never be the same again.